Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to Lecture 8B of Construction Site Management and Inspections. Today we're going to be talking about subcontractors and the supply chain and management of subcontractors in the supply chain by site supers, project managers involved in construction projects. So some of the things we'll talk about are some of the reasons why a general contractor will subcontract work out instead of doing it themselves. What role does the subcontractor play? A little bit about subcontractor agreements, the contracts between a contractor and a subcontractor, and some of the ethical aspects of dealing with subcontractors. So we'll be talking about how to build an excellent relationship with them and how to treat them fairly during the process. And I'll give you a little bit of an example as well with one of the clients that I've worked with in the past, and how they view their subcontractors. So that should make it a little bit interesting, I think. So GCs, 90% plus of the work is usually subcontracted. Gone are the days, or rare is it, where you see a GC perform a very large portion of the work. With that said, particularly in smaller marketplaces, you'll see general contractors will usually do some portion themselves, like the concrete work as an example. You'll often now see, with the amalgamation of a lot of the building systems contractors, where some have bought some of the larger entities out, where they control maybe the HVAC, the plumbing, and the electrical. Well, you know what? They're starting to get pretty smart and start thinking about, well, why don't we general contract this work? Not only can we general contract it, we can self-perform a large portion of it. So I have been seeing a little bit of that happening in certain projects. Particularly, they'll do that where the project has a lot of building systems work. So perhaps it's a renovation of a government building, which is requiring renewal of a lot of the building systems, like the plumbing, electrical, HVAC systems, and that's a huge opportunity for them. So the drywall and the metal stud partitions and the T-bar ceilings and the interior finishes, while being a fair substantial amount of that work, are not the biggest element. But generally, you can make the assumption that GCs subcontract most of the work. So they manage the process, the coordination of the work. So that's been a trend that really took place over the last 30, 40 years and is still strongly held. So subcontractors we need for a variety of work. On a single project, you might have 30 to 60 subcontractors, based on the variety and specializations. People can do things a lot quicker and a lot more effectively if that's all they do. It's hard to be the best at everything, and so you can get more competitive prices when you have contractors that specialize in things. That's why it's hard to self-perform in a wide swath of different trades, because it's hard to be really productive and efficient and competitive in price in that realm. So we usually look for specializations. Does, though, require a lot more coordination when you're dealing with a lot of different companies, a lot of balls in the air or plates that you're trying to balance out, if you've ever watched those jugglers. Just wanted to start off a little bit with an example of the Empire State Building. In lean construction, we look at the supply chain very closely, because if we can make the supply chain more effective and more efficient, we can reduce waste and add value to our clients. The Empire State Building was built in 1930. It's an amazing accomplishment, the overall construction process of it. It was built in the depths of the Great Depression. The Great Depression started in 1929, so the planning for it had started before the Depression, the onslaught of the Depression, but the availability of skilled workers was pretty easy during that time period. That's one of the things that happens when there's a big recession or depression. You can get access to workers much more easily. But they actually built the entire building in just over a year. Now, you think about that, a building of that size with the technology of 1930 and being able to excavate and construct it and have the ribbon cutting on May 1st, 1931. That is quite the accomplishment. It would be very difficult to do that today. Even with some of the, just think of some of the buildings in Toronto, very many of them, they don't get out of the ground in that period of time, never mind have the whole building completed. So it was interesting how they actually were able to accomplish that feat during that time period. A lot of history there. If you get some time, look it up on Google it and look up some of the history on the construction of it. The old Waldorf Astoria Hotel was on this property as well. But a lot of labor involved. And we had just talked about in the previous lecture safety. 5 people died building this project. For that time period, unfortunately, that probably was on the low side for a project of this kind of size. Although I understand that the Chrysler building in New York, I don't think there was any fatalities on that particular building. So that was even a greater accomplishment. But today that would be unacceptable, of course. But some of the pictures you'll see, and the famous picture of everybody sitting on the steel beam having lunch out, sort of hanging out from a crane is always one of interest. And that was building the Empire State Building as well. So steel columns, beams arrived at the site marked with their place in the framework and with the number of the derrick that would hoist them. These are the derricks that would hoist them. And it was all prefab, like a lot of the steel was all pre-designed and constructed outside, and so then it just needed to be assembled on site. And so there was a lot, given the technology too, again, of the time to make that all work, again, was quite the accomplishment. So they were actually at one point able to do 4.5 floors of steel each week. So 1, 2, 3, 4.5 floors of steel each week. Well, you know what? They would have needed to do that given the time frame that they built the building, right? But very much an accomplishment. Compared to a lot of our condominium buildings today, they'll usually shoot for about 1 floor per week on a lot of them from a comparative perspective. So yes, and it's still a huge landmark in New York. For many years, it was the tallest building in the world. They used a lot of lean principles before there were lean principles, because don't forget, the Japanese didn't start lean manufacturing in the Toyota way. It didn't really start till the work with Deming and Duran in the 1950s with the whole continuous improvement sort of aspect and using pull planning instead of push planning. So it really was ahead of its time in many ways. And they looked for and they thought about a lot of the things that we were talking about in this course, how to reduce movement. Remember, the 8 elements of waste and motion being one of them, and really looking at that very carefully and how they would transport the bricks and find the most easy way to get the bricks up to the various floors. Having a number of cafeterias on the different floors going up so that the travel time for workers to have lunch in certain spots was greatly reduced. That was another aspect that they looked at. While the outside of the building was being constructed, electricians, plumbers began installing the internal necessities of the building. Basically, this is where this term comes from. All right, the timing for each trade to start working was finally tuned, and basically it went like this, the quote: "When we were in full swing going up the main tower, things clicked with such precision that once we erected 14.5 floors in 10 working days, steel, concrete, stone, and all. We always thought of it as a parade. Hence the term parade of trades." This term parade of trades has been around in the field of construction. It's really sort of taken a foothold in lean construction, is the aspect of coordinating the work and using the trades to really engage with the work and be able to figure out the most efficient way and collaborating to the end goal of the project, as opposed to everybody just doing their own thing and not really worried about how it interacts with everything else. So it took a very holistic view as opposed to a very sort of I view. And I think we can understand that pretty well, even when we look at sports teams. If you have one player that's a superstar, but the rest of the team they don't really interact that well, even with the superstar, they're not going to win. I think basketball is probably a pretty good example where you see that happen, and where you have the superstar perhaps integrate really well, or even if you have a team that doesn't have the superstar, but there's a bunch of people that are interacting and combining and collaborating to maximum effect, you have success. And so the same thing works with a construction project. It's not great that you got one trade that's super fast but they're getting in everybody else's way and causing problems. It's much better to have them go at a more steady pace and interact and not slow the other trades down. So we want to make sure we have that aspect. And so hence the term parade of trades, in which each marcher kept pace, and the parade, in other words, you don't pass somebody and then get in their way, kept pace, and the parade marched out of the top of the building, still in perfect step. Sometimes we thought of it as a great assembly line, only assembly line did the moving. The finished product stayed in place. So it's just a concept to think about when we're thinking about all the subcontractors, all the suppliers, all the trades that are interacting and engaging in the work to complete the project. So when we think about subcontractors, we have to think about what we call the procurement process, and that is the buyout. We are buying out the contracts. We are buying out the subcontractors. I would say buyout, which is in your textbook, is probably a little bit more of an American term. We tend to use the term procurements. So we're doing the procurements, buyouts or procurements. You can use them interchangeably, tomato, tomato sort of thing. So procedures include pricing, purchasing material and equipment, tracking and expediting the purchase, controlling of material at the job site, and purchase or rental of construction equipment. Right? These are some of the items. All right. So as I mentioned, buyout, also referred to procurement, converting the bids to contracts. All right. It's one thing that you collected bids. Well, now you're awarding the contracts to the appropriate subcontract, converting quotes to purchase orders and contracts. So the contractor needs to balance the scopes and be able to compare quote to quote. Usually what happens is there's a pre-qualification process to ensure that whoever's giving them a quote is capable of doing the work. And then usually the work is assigned to the lowest bidder in that case. So field personnel need to understand what it is that subcontractor is going to do. So if you're part of the management team, what are they responsible for? What is their scope of work? What are the requirements with regards to schedule? You know, are they going to be there and they're going to work at a steady rate, like I used in the example of the Empire State Building? Or are they going to have to mobilize, demobilize, remobilize? What are some of the unique nuances of this particular project? And are they going to be able to fulfill those unique requirements? We talked about SMART goals and the aspect of specific, measurable, the A for attainable, contractor says they can do it, the R for realistic, do you believe they can do it? So what are the risks that are involved in the work that's being doing? Risks for safety, we talked about that, but also risks for quality assurance, risks for time, risks for costs, and any equipment, and I mentioned the safety already. All right, so really they have a wide variety of attributes. Many subcontractors do a multiple of things. Understanding what exactly is the nature of the business and their business and the scope of work that they're contracted to do is important. Subcontract agreement, which is the contract between the GC and the subcontractor, it's normally a lump sum, right? It's not too often, it's cost plus and that sort of thing, but definitely certain elements can be done that way depending on the complexity of the work. So it needs to be fair and ethical. Bid shopping is a term that really is problematic, all right? Contractors supply bid amounts from the subs to other subs. So you get a bid from one sub, you see what it is, and then you tell the other sub, can you do this lower than this or beat this? And then so what you're doing is you're soliciting this poor subcontractor to give you a price, and they've worked out all the pricing and everything, and now you're leveraging that price with another subcontractor. But in construction, it takes a long time to put together bids, and so you're wasting that subcontractor's time, and it's not an ethical thing to do. And if subcontractors find out you're doing it as a GC, well, if I'm a subcontractor, why do I want to bid on your projects if that's the way you behave and that's the way that you act? So it's not considered to be an ethical standard for contractors to do. Is it done? It's done, unfortunately, more than it should be done. So it's really a kind of a problem in the industry. Now, I'll talk about my case study, how some companies handle it in a few minutes. So we do have a sample subcontract, and it should include a number of these items, the dates, the parties, reference the construction documents, specifications. It doesn't rewrite them. It will identify them, and then that becomes part of an appendix to the contract that this contract includes these specifications, these drawings, and any other specifics that may be required. All right. It may also have things that it excludes, so things that that subcontractor does not intend to do specifically, and that happens a lot. You have to review very carefully any exclusions that subcontractor has put into their quotes, because you may find out later on that becomes a scope gap. All right, where the location is and what the price amount is, and the breakdown or schedule of values, the payment provisions of how you will pay the subcontractor on this project. There are a lot of government regulations with regards to payments, but there's also the contract provisions. Changes, claims, and delays, how they will be handled as well becomes important too. And we'll talk about changes in another class. If there's any insurance, specific insurance and bonding provisions, or you got to provide proof of WSIB, Workers' Safety Insurance Board, clearance certificates, is there a performance bond and a payment bond required? That would come into this. So other things would include, taxes, and there's a change order aspect, warranty, how the subcontractor will behave and interact with clients, how that disputes will be handled. We tend to call that ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution. So if there's a dispute, that you would go to an arbitrator or binding arbitration instead of the typical legal system. Tends to be a little bit less expensive, a little bit less lengthy. So remedy for solution of disputes, and if the agreement is to be terminated, usually something along those lines, particularly with a CCDC, Canadian Construction Documents Committee agreement. There's a lot more detail. This is just a short sort of renovator agreement I'm showing you here because it could fit in a couple of slides, but it gets much more involved. The clauses are much more detailed in a CCDC subcontract agreement. Scope definition in the so the definition, as I said, and usually like the exclusions or description of the work, any additional specific information would be listed out. Any schedule of work clauses related to time is of the essence, liquidated damages can be also included in these contracts for those reasons. Usually what it'll say is there'll be an expectation of time when the work is to be done and completed by, but the way it's written is that there's an expectation that those times will be adjusted. Typically the way it works is that the subcontractor is expected to adjust the time, and they're not expected to increase the cost unless they have a valid reason. So if all of a sudden you're shortening their time frame and they have to work weekends or overtime, then there's an expectation that they would likely incur extra costs. And as we said, termination, and as I mentioned, the alternative dispute resolution clause. So those are some examples. And you have to be very careful that seek professional legal advice, somebody that specializes in construction law, if you're going into signing one of these agreements, because there are a lot of clauses that you want to make sure that you fully comprehend and know what you're getting into. Coordination meetings, short-term planning, very important, as we mentioned previously. How we schedule the subcontractors to meet the project demands is important, and we have a lot of coordination meetings and different things of that nature with the subcontractors on site. You may have, this looks like a daily huddle that's going on in this particular project, but we have weekly meetings with the last planners, which are the foremen of the various subcontractors, to try to develop the 6-week look-aheads, the 2-week look-ahead schedules, and the weekly schedules to make sure that everybody knows what everybody's doing and to engage in that. It gets a lot more complicated than that if we're following lean methodologies, where we have a phase planning, we have a make-ready plan, the 6-week look-ahead, we have our weekly meetings and schedule, and then we have our daily huddles. So there's an integration that takes place to maximize efficiency. And we've talked about the importance of meetings and how to conduct an effective meeting in one of the earlier lectures. So when do we get paid? That should be outlined in the subcontract agreement. In Ontario, we've kind of gone to where the expectation is that you should be paid within 30 days of invoicing the work, provided that the invoicing is correct. That's a new legislation that's sort of just come into being, because in all honesty, when I was in construction, it was 30 days, and then somehow it stretched out to 45 days, and then it seemed to be stretching out to 60 days, and then more recently it seemed to be going to 90 days. It's getting kind of ridiculous. So there was government legislation that was brought in the last couple of years. So it's supposed to be at 30 days now, but it's a little bit of a complicated legislation. So as far as how effective it is at this moment in time, I'm going to say it's shortened, and I know with the contractors that I've been dealing with, all of a sudden payment's really quick, but I think it's still probably problematic with some of the smaller to medium-sized contractors. Back charges, deduction from amount owed. Well, back charge is like if the subcontractor doesn't do something right, or they don't clean up the site properly, or they damage something else, or they slow up work in some way. GCs often will back charge them. They'll take money off what they owe them, and they'll say because of X, Y, Z. Even that can be unethical if it's not done properly. It's different if that subcontractor was given full notice on things as you're going along. But if all of a sudden at the end of the project you say, I'm holding back $10,000 because of this, after they've done the work, that's not ethical. It should be a discussion that's going on. If they're doing something at that moment in time, like not cleaning up effectively, that it shouldn't be just kept quiet and now you're docking them hours and hours and hours, and it's building throughout the project, which unfortunately sometimes that happens. Not a good situation to build great relationships between subcontractors and general contractors. So withheld payments, so that can be, these issues can be problematic. I'm just going to bring up sort of a case study that I thought would be a little bit interesting for you to quickly see. Alice Dawn, who's one of the clients that I've worked for many years, if you go to their website, which is this, they have what they call a subcontractor's Bill of Rights. And the Subcontractor's Bill of Rights, and this is by Jeff Smith, their CEO. A Bill of Rights is a way to ensure that we're always treating our subcontractors professionally and ethically. Professionally and ethically. All Alice Dawn employees are expected to commit to this code of ethics every day so that every subcontractor benefits from fair and equitable treatment. So they have 5 key or core principles. Price shopping. So that was what I talked about earlier. Your textbook talks about it as bid shopping, right? Same thing. Price shopping is when, during a bid close, one subcontractor's low price is quietly given to another subcontractor in order to make that sub low. It is one of the most unethical practices in the industry, and it will not be tolerated. If an Alice Dawn employee is shown to have engaged in this practice once, they'll receive a formal warning. If they're caught twice, they will be terminated. They take it very seriously. Why do they take it very seriously? They take it very seriously because, like I said earlier, so I'm trying to connect everything we're talking about in this lecture because it kind of spills out in real life here. They're trying to build great relationships with subcontractors. They want to have the best subcontractors. And there are only so many good subcontractors. This is not treating them fair or ethically if you're shopping their bids. So that's just going to destroy those relationships. That is going to put you long-term in a negative competitive position because you're not going to have the best subcontractors. They're doing 90% of the work. You're going to have a problem. The low qualified sub at closing gets the job. So what they're saying here is the key word here is qualified. So they take a lot of time and effort to make sure if they're getting a bid, they've qualified the sub. So they're not getting bids from a shoemaker sub that's not very good, that is going to they're going to get the project, and they're not. So basically, anybody they've given the opportunity to price, they've qualified. So now, if you went to the trouble of carefully pricing this project out, they give you the respect of giving you the job if you're the low bid. So that's another thing, because that really burns subs if they spent the time and then they don't get the project. Now they do acknowledge, because it gets a little bit more complicated when they're acting as a construction, when it's a CM project and construction management, because clients really may want to choose a particular sub, and so they've gotten some different prices. That can get a little bit more complicated in those situations. But in your typical design, bid, build, this makes sense. No back charges. So we just talked, the whole lecture, whole chapters revolves around this is industry stuff. This is what goes on. This is why the CEO took the time to write this. It's right on their webpage for the world to see. No back charges. Ellis Don defines back charges as a charge that comes without both clear advance notice and appropriate justification and documentation. So first they're defining it, because different places. It's not that they'll never back charge somebody. You damaged this, or you didn't follow the contract for that, or you left the garbage all and we had to clean it. But they don't let it build up. It's a constant, transparent communication. See, without both clear advance notice and appropriate justification and documentation. They're going to have photo document. They're going to have stuff that this is why this is the way it is. The idea that we can send out back charges at the end of projects without an adequate prior warning and appropriate justification has no future at ED. If you, as a subcontractor, can show an inappropriate back charge according to the above definition, it gets canceled. There you go. Timely payment. Pay on time. Whatever the time frame is, you set that up. It's in the contract, and then you follow it. So again, as I was saying, it was going from 30 days to 45 days to 60 days to 90 days in this industry. It was going crazy. One thing they've always done is this is the time frame, and like clockwork, the money arrives when the time frame is. Well, at least you know. If the time frame's longer than you like, you knew it, and it was signed up, and it's fair and it's transparent. And if the payment doesn't come, they're very good, quick, right? Building those great relationships. Subcontractor, your livelihood. If you don't get paid from that GC, you might be out of business. So it's a tense part in the construction industry. Return phone calls. So basically, they will return if you need to have a response about some information. They work very hard to respond effectively. So I just wanted to put that out there as a case that you could sort of look to. The big GCs, most of them, they're fighting to get the best subcontractors. They want to be competitive. I use this as an example because it's very well articulated, but most of the big GCs that I've been dealing with, they kind of have that same attitude along the way, because they understand that. So keep that in mind. And this is what that book is trying to, the site management textbook, the Minx site management that you're using in the course is trying to espouse, and what I've been trying to espouse in the lectures, just so that it makes sense for you. Okay, so we'll go back to our lecture. And Subcontractor coordination. So a big part is coordinating the work. Discuss the fastest course possible, most efficient course possible. Determine, that's where those site meetings works. That's where the coordination comes out between the crane schedule, the look ahead schedule, the master schedule that we talked about in a previous class. The use of material and equipment and coordination of that material and equipment on site to make sure that it's operating safely and that it's being used efficiently. And coordinating that they are keeping the site safe and that they are keeping it clean and that they are doing their role. These are important things that's your job to ensure. Look at all the nails. I see nails everywhere sticking out of this stuff. I can see nails there. I can see nails here. I can see a nail right there sticking out of that piece of wood. This is crazy, right? This is craziness. This is not good job site management. And this I took, as I was mentioning this morning when I was out for a walk. You see what I do on my off time. I go for walks around construction sites and take pictures. But unacceptable, totally unacceptable. So coordination, safety, waste management needs to be discussed. So going back to the previous example where we were talking about back charges, well, this is something, if this was my framing subcontractor and they were doing this on this site and throwing this out and they're supposed to be cleaning the site out, unless the contract says for me to be cleaning it, that's different. Then I would right away on a daily basis be making sure that they're keeping this site clean. If they're not, then yeah, I am going to be cleaning it. I'm going to be telling them ahead of time exactly what this is going to cost them. So that's being transparent. So it's not that you're not going to charge them if they're not fulfilling their contract, but you're communicating those aspects. So with our discussions of subcontractors and purchase orders and contracts, we have to make sure that we have clarity. There could be second-tier subcontracts where the subcontractor has subcontracted work to somebody else. That's another thing that we have to consider. And some important control concepts, because their subs may be then on the project, and so we have to make sure that they've been trained and they're working safe and they're fulfilling the overall subcontractor's contract. We'd still be inspecting the work that they've done, but we'd be dealing with their basically contractor in doing that. There's a hierarchy between the contracts. And you can see this is actually much better than the previous one. Look at how clean this site is. Look, everything is organized, nice and in rolls. There's your garbage box. You see no garbage lying around. Look at that. And it's all leveled out for the trucks coming in and out. And this had been excavated before, but they compacted it just for the work area. This is all going to be dug down multiple levels for a huge condominium building that's going to go in here. Very, very organized, very clean. So, you know, you got the good and you've got the ugly, right? Okay, so that's pretty much the things that I wanted to go through on this today, and hopefully you get a good sense of subcontractors, the treatment of subcontractors, the coordination, and tying it in with all the other lectures. There's all these little nodes that should be going up, and we're connecting the dots slowly over this course, and it's going to start to connect more and more with the coming lectures. But I hope you're starting to see the connections taking place of site management, managing the project sites. So this is Tom Stephenson, wishing everyone a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.